The grandstands were already half empty when the officials arrived. Engines had gone silent. Pit crews packed tools into metal cases. Mechanics wiped oil from their hands and avoided eye contact. But in the center of the garage, one car remained surrounded. Not by fans, by investigators. 3 men in dark jackets leaned over the engine bay with flashlights, whispering to each other. One of them scribbled something on a clipboard. Another shook his head slowly. Across the garage floor, the team owner stood frozen. 30 years in racing, millions of dollars invested, hundreds of employees depending on him. And now, everything hung on what those inspectors were about to find inside that engine. Because if their suspicion was correct, this wouldn't just be a disqualification, it would be the end of a racing team forever. And the strangest part? Just 12 hours earlier, that same engine had crossed the finish line to thunderous applause. It was supposed to be the greatest victory in the team's history. Instead, it would become one of the most controversial bans in motorsport history. And the story of how it happened begins years earlier, with an obsession. In the early 1990s, American endurance racing was exploding. Le Mans had already become legendary. Daytona was drawing bigger crowds every year. Sponsors were pouring in millions. Car manufacturers were turning races into global marketing wars. Horsepower meant headlines. Speed meant money. And for smaller racing teams, survival meant innovation. One of those teams was a scrappy, independent outfit based in the American Midwest. They weren't backed by a major manufacturer. They didn't have the budgets of Porsche or Mercedes. What they did have was a reputation for clever engineering. Their team owner, a former mechanic turned entrepreneur, believed one thing above all else: if you can't outspend them, outthink them. He hired young engineers straight out of college, people who hadn't yet learned what was impossible. One of them, a quiet engine designer named David Mercer, had an idea that would change everything. At first, it sounded insane, but it also promised something every racing team wanted: more power, without breaking the rules, at least, not technically. Mercer spent months studying the rulebook, hundreds of pages of regulations, fuel limits, air intake restrictions, engine displacement caps. The rules were designed to keep competition fair. But Mercer noticed something strange. The regulations described what engines could do, but they didn't fully describe how they had to do it. There were gaps, tiny gray areas buried in legal language, places where clever engineering could hide. And Mercer began designing an engine that lived entirely inside those gaps. On paper, it complied with every rule. In reality, it behaved very differently. At its core, the motor used a system that manipulated airflow in a way inspectors had never seen before. Not illegal, just unexpected. In testing, the numbers were unbelievable. More power, better efficiency, longer endurance, the kind of advantage that wins races. But when Mercer first showed the prototype to the team owner, the reaction wasn't excitement, it was fear. Because if the system worked the way Mercer predicted, other teams would accuse them of cheating, and racing politics could be just as dangerous as mechanical failure. Still, the temptation was too strong. Millions of dollars in prize money, global recognition, a chance to beat the giants. So the team made a decision. They would run the engine, quietly. At first, nobody noticed. The team entered smaller endurance races. Their car finished consistently near the top. Commentators praised the reliability. Rival teams assumed it was just smart strategy. But in the garage, engineers from other teams were starting to whisper. Something wasn't normal. Their straight-line speed seemed suspicious. Not dramatically faster, just faster enough to raise eyebrows. Still, protests require evidence, and no one could find any. The engine passed inspection after every race. Officials checked displacement. They checked fuel systems. They checked air restrictors. Everything matched the rulebook. So the team kept winning, and the whispers grew louder. Then came the race that changed everything: the 24 hours of Daytona. For American racing fans, it's one of the most brutal endurance battles in motorsport. 24 hours, day and night, drivers rotating in shifts, cars pushed to their mechanical limits. Finishing alone is an achievement. Winning is legendary. The small Midwest team entered with confidence. Their mysterious engine had already proven durable, but Daytona would be the ultimate test. And early in the race, something strange happened. During the first few hours, the car wasn't dominating. It stayed comfortably in the top 5. Observers relaxed. Maybe the rumors were exaggerated. But as night fell, the car came alive. Lap times started dropping. Fuel stops became shorter. Competitors noticed they were running longer stints between refueling. And by sunrise, the gap was impossible to ignore. The underdog team was leading, comfortably. Commentators called it a Cinderella story. Fans cheered. But inside rival garages, engineers were furious because the numbers didn't make sense. Halfway through the race, one rival team filed a protest. They accused the engine of violating airflow restrictions. Officials inspected the car again. Everything looked normal. The protest was denied. The race continued, but the tension had changed. Now everyone was watching that engine. And when the checkered flag finally dropped, the small team crossed the finish line first. The garage erupted in celebration. Mechanics hugged each other. Drivers sprayed champagne. The team owner cried in front of cameras. It was the victory of a lifetime. Until the inspectors showed up. Post-race inspections are routine in motorsport. Usually they confirm what everyone expects. But this time, officials were looking for something specific. The protest from earlier in the race had planted a seed of doubt, and the governing body decided to perform a deeper investigation. They removed the engine, disassembled components, measured parts down to microscopic tolerances. For hours, they found nothing illegal. Everything matched the regulations. Then, one engineer noticed something odd. A component that looked completely normal, but moved in a way it shouldn't. Not during normal operation, only under specific conditions. High airflow, high pressure, race conditions. When investigators recreated those conditions on a test bench, the truth appeared. Hidden inside the system was a tiny mechanical trick, a device that allowed more air into the engine than regulations permitted, but only while the engine was running at full race speed. During inspections, it returned to legal limits. It was brilliant engineering and devastatingly illegal. News spread through the paddock like wildfire. Other teams were furious. Some demanded the victory be stripped immediately. Others wanted harsher punishment. They argued this wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate deception. The governing body launched a formal investigation. Engineers were questioned, design documents were seized, and slowly, the full story came out. The engine hadn't been built accidentally. It had been designed from the beginning to exploit the inspection process itself, a loophole inside a loophole, technically within written regulations, but clearly against the spirit of the sport. And the racing world had no patience for that. The final ruling came weeks later. It shocked everyone. The Daytona victory was erased from the record. Prize money was revoked. Sponsors withdrew within days. But the most devastating punishment was saved for last. The governing body declared that the team had engaged in intentional regulatory manipulation. Their competition license was permanently revoked. Not a suspension, not a fine, a lifetime ban. 30 years of racing history, gone overnight. The fallout was brutal. Without racing income, the team collapsed within months. Dozens of mechanics and engineers lost their jobs. Sponsors distanced themselves from the scandal. The team owner, once celebrated as an underdog hero, became a cautionary tale. As for the engine designer, David Mercer, he disappeared from motorsport entirely. Some say he went into aerospace engineering. Others claim he continued designing experimental engines overseas. No one knows for sure. What everyone does know is this: the banned engine was never publicly displayed. Investigators sealed the design documents. Even today, details of the system remain confidential, which raises a strange question, because years later, engineers studying the case noticed something unusual. The engine didn't just exploit a loophole, it revealed one, a loophole that, if used differently, might actually have been legal. And that's the mystery that still lingers in racing circles. Was the team punished for cheating? Or for being too clever too soon? Because somewhere out there, the design for that engine still exists, and if someone ever builds it again, the motorsport world might have to decide whether it was illegal or simply ahead of its time.